This is a 15-minute audio excerpt from an interview posted on Hidden Experience, and that can be found at hiddenexperience.blogspot.com. And that URL is linked in the show notes below this YouTube video. Audio conversation with Jeff Kripal, recorded November 5th, 2011. Jeff Kripal is a professor at Rice University in Texas, where he is also the chair of the Department of Religious Studies. He's authored a series of books, but the two books that I'm going to focus on in this interview, one, his most recent book, is titled Mutants and Mystics, and it is a interesting study of science fiction and comic book lore and how they relate to the mystical. And he does a beautiful and engaging job of investigating just that quandary. And I was delighted by it, mostly just because I like science fiction and comic books. So he really sucked me in. Now, he also wrote another book called Authors of the Impossible, where he looks at four authors, and these authors include Jacques Vallée and Charles Fort. And he looks at how these authors have stepped into the realm of the paranormal and tried to document it, make sense of it, and ultimately how they tried to frame these paranormal events in a very, very big picture way. It's fascinating stuff. I've included a whole bunch of links in the show notes, including Jeff's own podcast series, which is called Impossible Talk, as well as some links to excerpts of the book. I recommend both these books highly. I particularly recommend the Mutants and Mystics book just because it deals with comic books so much, and he has a lot of very, very beautiful references and beautiful color plates in the book. Just holding the book in the hand is very, very lovely experience. I had a thoroughly enjoyable time talking to Jeff, and I hope you get something out of this interview. Please enjoy. Jeff, I want to thank you so much for saying yes to this interview. It really means a lot to me.
Oh, well, it means a lot to me too. I enjoy these things.
Good, good. Here, just as a way to begin this, I'm holding in my hand a book called Mutants and Mystics, which I am in the act of reading right now. I haven't finished it. It's great. It resonates very strongly with me. And I first heard about you when you did a brief interview with Christopher Knowles on his site. That was for your previous book titled Authors of the Impossible. And let me just say something about Christopher Knowles. When I first heard about Christopher Knowles, he was being interviewed on a podcast, and that's the very first time I got introduced to his line of thinking. And he responded to the interviewer, and the interviewer said, "Oh, we really don't have any mythology these days." And Chris immediately responded that, "No, we are swimming in mythology. We are awash in mythology, and it is showing up right now in the form of..." And as I was listening to that audio, I kind of shouted at my computer, and I said, "It's showing up in the form of the UFO phenomena." But that's not what Christopher Knowles said. His declaration was, mythology is showing up in the form of the superhero comics. Now, I think both Chris and I are seeing the same mysterious force playing itself out, and we are both aware of its performance, albeit on different stages. And for the reasons of this interview, I'm just going to attempt to keep it all focused on the UFO lore, because that's something I'm much more familiar with.
Sure, but as the Mutants and Mystics book points out, the superhero mythologies wouldn't exist without the motif of the alien and the UFO. So they're all woven together. But I'm happy to focus on the UFO thing.
Good, and just so you know, I come from that generation where I had stacks of Marvel comics. I'm a huge fan of Jack Kirby, and I am actually working on my own graphic novel right now, albeit slowly, that in a way to attempt to come to terms with some of my own personal experiences.
Right, that's great.
Can you just give, from your point of view, a summation, which might be hard to do, of the content of this book?
So, okay, well, I got to back up a bit, Mike. In 2007, I published a book called Esalen, America and the Religion of No Religion, which is a history of the human potential movement, which originated out in out in California and really flourished in the counterculture. And while I was interviewing folks for that book, I kept encountering stories about various paranormal abilities, UFOs, the whole range, that were simply impossible. But they clearly happened. And so I began to struggle with how to handle these stories in that project. And so the other thing that happened to me there was as I was finishing the Esalen book, I became obsessed with my Marvel comic collection from my youth. So I found myself pulling it out of the closet and visiting comic book stores and spending way too much money on old comics. And I didn't know why. I didn't understand this. Was it just a kind of midlife regression? What was going on? And I realized though at some point that the basic idea of the human potential movement is that the human being is vastly more magnificent and capacious than we normally imagine, and that we have these abilities and forms of mind in us that are normally suppressed by our culture, and that things like paranormal abilities and mystical experiences are essentially buds, evolving buds of our future supernature. And I realized that that's basically the X-Men. What I was looking at is a model where American culture has produced a series of mythologies on the East Coast and was at the same time living them out as a series of mystical thinkers and movements on the West Coast. And so I became really fascinated by that resonance and set out to write Mutants and Mystics. So the Mutants is a reference to the New York comic industry, and the Mystics is a reference to the California human potential movement. And so that's how I came to write that book. What actually happened, though, is I ended up writing Authors of the Impossible first because I realized I couldn't really understand what was going on in the science fiction and the comics unless I understood more about the history of psychical and paranormal phenomena. So Authors is the intellectual history, and Mutants and Mystics is how it all plays out in popular culture.
So, part of the reason I set up this which I'll just give you a little heads up here before we go into this. The reason I set up this blog and this podcast system is because of my own personal set of experiences, which some people, some UFO researchers are very quick to label as UFO abduction. And that may very well be true, though I don't have any direct experience of that. I do have some things that certainly indicate that, and some of the experiences I've had are extremely strange, though they presently seem to be manifesting themselves in the realm of like very powerful, profound synchronicities that seem to be pointing towards the UFO abduction lore.
Yeah.
I could give you some specific examples, but that if once I start talking, it might be hard to shut me up. So, uh,
But
and,
you've had these experiences, and that's the source of the interest. That's a significant point.
yes, and it's more in a combination of the source of the interest as well as it sort of goes beyond interest, where it feels like it's like I've been confronted with a mystery, and it's very challenging.
Yeah,
Like just to sort of realize that like perhaps it's sort of lonely, to be quite honest, to realize that very few people share what I've experienced. So when I tell these stories, no one can be supportive in a way that maybe I am needing. And that said, with the advent of the internet, I've connected with a lot of people, and that connection has been really interesting. I don't know how Whitley Strieber did it before the advent of the internet.
yeah. Well, we should talk about that loneliness because that's the classical structure of the mystical. That's the secret, and there are ways to talk about that.
Um, in Authors of the Impossible, which I'm jumping back to the other book, you told about an experience when you were a young boy of seeing a UFO.
Right.
And
which I don't remember.
yes, but just can you just briefly retell that now?
Well, yeah, it's sort of funny, really. I mean, I was sitting with my mother actually. We were watching American Idol. It was probably 3, 4 years ago, and we were just munching on popcorn or something. And this really stupid car commercial came on with this really fake flying saucer on it. And mom just out of the blue said, "Oh, well, do you remember the time we saw a UFO?" And I was like, no, I have no memory of that. And then she proceeded to tell this fairly elaborate story about us driving in northern Nebraska at night when I was probably 5 and seeing a very large rectangular craft in the sky that really scared mom and dad because it seemed to be following us. And and again, I quizzed her then. And I talked to dad about it. Dad confirmed the story. I asked my brother. Of course, he didn't remember it. He's younger than I am, so he was like 3 or 4. So uh, again, I have no memory whatsoever of this. Not because I was abducted or anything, just because I was 5. But it was clearly some kind of encounter. My first feeling was that it had something to do with Sac Air Force Base, which is just a couple 100 miles east of there. But mom insisted it was just too big and too square or rectangular to be a military plane. So that's the one UFO story I have, and it's not really even mine. It's my mother's.
Well, that said, you were present, and
Yeah.
just for me, I look at that story through the eyes of like an investigator, and to me, that's a very interesting story. And that who knows the impact that had, whether subconsciously or consciously, and just now to see the work you are doing, that to me is very much an ingredient in the content of this bigger book that I'm holding in my hand here, Mutants and Mystics.
Well, that's true. That's absolutely true, and I mean true in the sense that that's a plausible idea. The other origins of the Mutants and Mystics book is what I studied for about a decade in graduate school and early in my career was the goddess Kali, the Hindu goddess Kali, and I was particularly obsessed with her eyes. And if you look at images of Kali's eyes, they're essentially identical to Spider-Man's eyes. And those in turn are essentially the same kind of iconic almanac of the alien. So there's this weird symbolic resonance moving through the comic books of my youth with Spider-Man and this tantric goddess of my early adulthood, and then these last 2 books really on the mythology of the alien.
And you use the term mystic in the title of the book, and you equate modern comic book authors and science fiction writers to our present day mystic. And can you just give a definition of mystic? That's such an open-ended term in a way.
Well, I prefer the adjective mystical. I mean, I do refer to people who have had these experiences as mystics. But, the mystical is Greek. It means secret. And it has a long history in Western philosophy and religion. And it normally refers to the secret meaning of a text, the secret nature of a human being, or the secret structure of the cosmos. And so the mystical, quite literally, is the secret essence of things. The way mysticism came to be used in the 19th and 20th century, it referred to particularly dramatic religious experiences in which the person became one or even identical with the divine. So when we refer to a mystical experience, we're not referring to something fuzzy or abstract. We're referring to a type of religious experience in which the human being comes to understand himself or herself to be identical to either God or the cosmos or however they understand the ultimate.
This is a 15-minute audio excerpt from an interview posted on Hidden Experience, and that can be found at hiddenexperience.blogspot.com. And that URL is linked in the show notes below this YouTube video.